I'd like to start today by telling you a story about a young woman named Christina. Christina's from a small town in the southeast of Colombia, where she lived with her husband and their baby girl. Now, when Christina was living there, at that time, the area had been controlled by the FARC, the violent Marxist-Leninist guerrilla group that controlled that area and a lot of the Colombian countryside from the 1960s until just recently. When conflict erupted in the area nearby and eventually encroached on her town and eventually her neighborhood, Christina and her family were forced to flee. Under the cover of darkness, she, her husband, and their baby girl ran, carrying just a few items that they could with them. But it didn't take long until they came face to face with the FARC, and her husband was tragically killed on the spot. By some miracle, Christina survived, and so did her baby girl, and they ran to her sister's house. From there, they ran once again, fleeing for safety, but this time to the sprawling capital city of Colombia, Bogota. Once they were there, Christina faced overwhelming challenges in a city that's teeming with millions of people, many of whom, like her, were trying to seek safety from violence across Colombia and in neighboring countries. She managed to find them a place to live and some casual work, all while she was navigating just unthinkable trauma and grief. But the casual work was not enough for her. Christina wanted more, because she and her husband had always dreamed of giving their daughter a better life. She had always had a love for art and design, and so she enrolled in a vocational school where she was able to discover a new passion, this time for leather shoemaking. She thought that this interest certainly drew on her creativity, but she also thought that it might find and offer her a path towards an income one day. So when she graduated, Christina opened a small workshop in the leather goods district of Bogota, and her business grew slowly. She was able to hire one employee and then another. And then gradually, to today, she now has a successful shoe manufacturing company where she hires over 30 employees and distributes shoes across Colombia and through department stores and retail stores. And yes, I'm wearing shoes from Christina's company today. So when I think about Christina's story, it reminds me of many of the themes that I've seen in the 25 years that I've worked in global development. The first of which is that people who've been affected by violence and conflict really don't want to be reliant on aid. Whether in a refugee camp or, like Christina, making a new life in a new city, what they simply want is to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. To be able to put food on the table, send their kids to school, just build a better life for themselves and their families and communities. And data bears this out as well. From surveys of crises across the globe, you see that after safety, livelihoods are the top priority for people who've experienced violence. Now, it's almost as though we can think of those people as trying to seek the American dream without having to come to America for it. And after you've done this work for a little while, you've come to see that actually the American dream really isn't that unique to America. It really is the dream for humanity. So let me tell you another story, this time about a much more unlikely entrepreneur called Maya. Maya was from Syria, and she had studied chemistry at the University of Damascus. And she pictured herself one day working in a lab. The calm and logic and consistency of science providing a bit of a safe haven from just the chaotic world outside. But both the world and the war had a different plan for Maya. In 2013, she was forced to flee Syria when the crisis was really escalating there. And she fled first to Jordan and then moved onwards to Turkey. And through that journey, she found solace in a traditional handicraft of making laurel soap. Now, laurel soap is a traditional soap made from olive oil and the oil of laurel berries. And so what started as a hobby for Maya soon turned into a business venture. She applied successfully for a business license and started selling to friends and family and their networks. Now, when we think about entrepreneurs like Maya, like Christina, we begin to recognize parts of their story in people in our own families. Their grit, their hard work and passion, their determination, and what every entrepreneur needs, just a little bit of good luck. Because if there is one thing that unites all of us, it's that one common thread of being able to build a better life for the people that we love. And it was this desire that spurred my grandfather to leave his small village in India and go and seek new opportunities, eventually trading textiles between East Africa and Italy. And it was this same desire that spurred my father to move to England when he was 16 and study engineering and eventually also become an entrepreneur. And like many entrepreneurs, my dad had a really strong stomach for risk. Because for him, it was my two sisters and I that motivated his determination. Our education, our lives, and our future. And so that's the really cool thing about being able to support small business entrepreneurs, is that the payoff is generational. And I'm standing here on this stage as a living testimony of that. And so now, today, I think of my work as a gift. I run a nonprofit called Building Markets, where we work to support small business owners to grow. And these small business leaders are from communities that have been affected by conflict, by displacement, and poverty. And so I get to see that same hope that was in the eyes of Maya and Christina in the eyes of thousands of entrepreneurs across the globe. But I also know, and I've been doing this long enough, that hope alone is not enough to ensure success. I've spent a lot of time looking at the evidence of what works to create an effective solution to support small business owners. And so I've seen my fair share of training programs for entrepreneurs that don't actually help their businesses grow, or where entrepreneurs might see a small increase in profit, but not enough to help them actually create quality jobs in those communities that need them the most. And so that's why I'm so excited about Building Markets' focus on what I think is one of the most undervalued and underestimated, one of the biggest missed opportunities for small business owners today. And it's the wonderful world of supply chain integration. Now stay with me, and I promise, I know your eyes are glazing over, but I promise you will be as excited about supply chains as I am. So supply chains in international trade are valued at about $23 trillion. And that number balloons once you start looking at domestic and local supply chains. And why is that number so large? And it's important, so please remember it, because we'll come back to it. That number is so large because supply chains fuel literally everything that we need in our everyday lives, from our clothes and our shoes, to the materials that created the seats that you're sitting in, to the construction materials that we use to build this auditorium that we're in today. But for a small business owner, what supply chain integration means is no longer for Christina to be selling her shoes from her storefront, but for her to be able to sell in retail stores, department stores, in markets that she doesn't ever visit herself. But doing that is not easy. Creating a beautiful product is not enough. Those products need to be tested and certified. The The packaging that they're in need to meet environmental regulations. They need to be produced at volume and then go through lengthy transportation to their final port of call, crossing innumerable types of red tape along the way. And that's where small business entrepreneurs need a helping hand. They simply don't have the networks, information, or know-how to be able to do that. And if you look at it today, women-led businesses win just a jaw-dropping 1% of total global supply chain opportunities. 1%. So let that number sink in. That means that women aren't just leaving deals at the table. They're nowhere near the table, nor the room where the table is situated. So what can we do about it? So let's go back to the story of Maya. So Maya was making these beautiful soaps. She started diversifying into new product areas and continuing to sell to her loyal base of family and friends. But she wanted to do more, and she knew she could do more. She felt she had the productive capacity to sell more, but she just didn't know to whom and where. She started working with a building markets mentor, and together they did three things. They first certified her products so that she could get them to comply with EU regulations. Second, they worked together on building their digital presence so that she could be more easily found by corporate buyers and people that she didn't have direct interaction with. And then lastly, and perhaps most critically, the mentors just made introductions to hotel chains, to supermarkets, to beauty stores and pharmacies who may be interested in her products. And so I can happily say that now Maya's not only still selling to her loyal base of family and friends who will always support her, but also she's selling to stores across Turkey and exporting to Germany. Now Maya's story is unique, but her success isn't. Since Building Markets founding, we've helped generate over $1.5 billion in contract value for small business entrepreneurs like Maya, like Christina. That's translated into 75,000 jobs in those communities that need them the most. So that's 75,000 hardworking people who don't need to move, but can stay where they are, building that life that they want for themselves and their families. So in this new vision of aid that I'm sharing, it relies on a new way of thinking about win-win. So the win for the entrepreneurs is clear, but there's also a win for the corporations. They get new innovative products. They get a more diverse supply chain. And they get access into communities that they may care about, but their employees and their consumers more often than not do. So let's go back to the number that I mentioned earlier. Who can remember? 25 trillion, great. So 25 trillion to me, at the very minimum, is the size of the opportunity that we have at hand to create just a more just and inclusive world. So when you hear, the next time you hear about funding shortfalls for aid and cuts to development assistance that we hear time and again these days, I want you to think about that 25 trillion that's being left unleveraged on the table. Because I know that if we can rewire that 25 trillion, we can start creating actually effective and sustainable solutions for poverty, displacement, crisis. But we can also start unleashing the potential of that dream that we now know isn't just the American dream, but is really the dream for humanity. Thank you.